Hello, I'm Wendy. Today we're looking at watercolour skies and I'm putting a snowy landscape underneath them. It's a painting tutorial for beginners and those with a little experience in watercolour. This is my reference photo taken on the Brecon Beacons here in South Wales a few years ago. The sky was heavy with purpley blue clouds over a very cold blue background sky. The photograph doesn't really do it justice, but here's an interpretation that I made from the photograph and from my memory. The sky is painted wet into wet, and I'll show you all the steps that I did. And there's a very simple snowy landscape underneath with just one hawthorn tree, which you find dotted about on the beacons. Here's a quick sketch of the scene which I did, showing the main compositional lines. There's the hill at the back. There are some perspective lines really leading into the picture. There's going to be a shadow across the front and that hawthorn tree that I mentioned on the right hand side. I initially did this as a square composition, but I did in fact lower the sky, as you'll see going through the video. So there's some flexibility there in how much sky you do want to put into the picture. Now this little sketch may help you and it is downloadable. If you go to my website, there's a link in the description box. It will take you to my website and you'll find this downloadable picture there and also some additional teaching resources if you're interested. We'll have a quick look at the colours that I used. For this greeny blue that was the background sky, I used phthalo blue. Now phthalo blue is also called intense blue in the Cotman range. You could also use Prussian blue as well. These cold blues are very staining, so do be aware of that and remember that they won't lift out of a painting as easily as some of the other colours like ultramarine and cobalt blue. I put some warmth into the sky where I felt it needed it, using a very dilute mix of light red. And for the clouds themselves, I used a mix of cobalt blue and light red. I got some of these mixes ready beforehand, and I did a medium strength and a darker strength. I started off by just doing the horizon line. This is always a good idea, especially if you've got some wet into wet skies that you're doing. They don't always work out that well, and it's a shame to waste a drawing that you might have spent a lot of time on. So as a tip, I would suggest put the horizon line in and then have a little practice with some of these skies. I'm putting on a very dilute phthalo blue for the cold blue that's showing through in the sky, and then I'm using a very dilute light red. I'm putting this in areas where I felt the sky needed some warmth. You may see that I didn't wet the paper first. If you feel that you're working quite slowly in watercolour or the skies are not staying soft edged, then I would advise that you do wet the paper a little bit before you start these washes. Wet it evenly, but don't soak it too much. I felt I needed the blue to be a little bit more intense in the middle here. I'm painting now the medium strength of the mix for the clouds. I'm just trying to place it, looking at the photograph. It's very easy to actually paint over all that light blue, which I've done on a few occasions because I practice these. So be careful not to do that. Keep building up the darks and vary the colour a little bit. Keep going back to your colour mixers and load your brush often to achieve the darker tones in the painting. Don't worry at all if you can't get these darker tones. The painting will still work really nicely with a lighter sky. Just try and keep the washes very soft. I'm starting on the landscape now by putting in those distant trees. I'm using the same mix of colours and a small brush, a number 4, just to suggest the distant trees on the horizon line. The sky is thoroughly dry, so the paint is going wet onto dry. The distant snowy field was in shadow, as you can see from the photo that I put up here, and I used a bluey-grey mix of cobalt blue with some light red and just a touch of the burnt sienna. I used a similar mix to this, but just with a little more phthalo blue into it to paint the shadow in the foreground. I kept it very watery and kept my brush loaded as I was adding the colour. It is hard-edged. You could make this a softer edge shadow if you wish. I think it worked well though when the grasses were painted over it in the finished picture. You may be wondering why I put the shadow on at this stage. Well, what I find is if I put in the grasses first and maybe some marks to show the soil showing through the ground, when I put this shadow over it, it can blur those colours and they won't be as sharp and it doesn't look quite as natural. So this is the reason why I like to put shadows on first and then put the other things on top of them. I'm incorporating a little bit of dry brush work, just some random marks for shadows, and just a tiny bit of the blue along those, what I'm calling the perspective lines, which were there. I'm not quite sure what they were, perhaps the remains of a hedgerow or something like that, that lead the eye into the picture. Make sure in the distance that they are paler. At this stage I felt that distant field was looking a little bit too warm, too much red in it compared to the shadow in the foreground. So what I did was I mixed a little bit of phthalo blue with a lot of water and just put a glaze over that field, and I was happier with that. Never be afraid to make adjustments like this because that's part of the painting process. I tackled the tree next, and I was looking here at one of my little practice pieces I was talking about, a few of these just to try and work out the composition and everything for the video. And I rather liked the little hawthorn tree that I did in that, so I've got it here just as a little reference for me to paint the tree in this picture. I'm using a mix of the cobalt blue with burnt sienna for the whole of the tree, and you'll see I tackle this and I use quite a lot of rigger work towards the end. I'll give you a link in the description box to a video I made quite recently on the use of the rigger in painting trees like this. In my little practice painting, I did put white gouache on some of these branches on this tree, and you have the option to do that. You know, at the end of the day, this is going to be your little picture. You've not got to copy it exactly as I did it. The white gouache does look nice, and I might use it in a few places on the grasses, but in this case I left the tree as it was. You'll see later in the video I did darken up the trunks a little bit. There were these little middle distance trees or hedges to put in there, using the similar colours, and also on that back hill there, that back snowy hill with the shadow, there were a few fields or hedgerows, separating fields on the back there, and I put those in as well, just to add some interest in the background, nothing too detailed. Now at this point I have to apologise because I forgot to press the start record button when I was painting the grasses. So easily done. But here we are, I'm going to show you how to do the grasses on this little bit of paper. Rather than starting off painting them individually, I used the dry brush technique with a mix of the burnt sienna and the cobalt blue, as you can see here. Again, I do have a video describing this technique and I'll put it in the description box below for you. The paint needs to be fairly stiff. I used a smallish brush here because the picture is quite small and number 4, and I varied the colour so that in some areas I had a bit more of the burnt sienna. And then to ring the changes, a few extra strokes with the rigger brush. And finally, on the right hand side here, I just put in a few marks that stand for the soil showing through the snow. So time to look at the final picture and decide on the final composition here. I like to use what I call my 2 L shapes here, which is an old mount cut into 2. And this is really helpful on judging your picture and seeing if anything else needs doing. I do hope you enjoyed the video and learned something useful from it. I enjoyed painting it, particularly as the beacons are a very special place for me, especially in the snow. Bye for now. If you want to give me a thumbs up, feel free, and also you can subscribe to my channel so you don't miss anything coming up in the future. Bye for now.